Welcome to Art Traffic. Let's get going.
I remember I had a friend in Philly whose favorite artist was, according to him, Jean-Michel Basquiat. So that was...
That's tender.
Yeah.
Even for me, that's sweet. Okay, this week on Art Traffic, we have a great artist and good friend, Justin Michell, on the show today. He self-identifies as a theory geek, which I appreciate, and I hope you like the story of why and how he is one. I think it's maybe the best answer I've ever heard on this question. He has really inventive ideas about painting and looking at art. He just has a different perspective. And we talk a lot about Scientology. His side hustles is great. I hope you guys all really enjoy this one. I did. If you want to follow along, look at images of Justin's work while we're looking at the podcast. His website is justinmichell.com. That's JustinMichell. No E at the end.com. And his Instagram is Michelle_Justin. Michell. Okay, thanks everybody for listening. I hope you really enjoy it. This is Art Traffic.
I've got a garage. Yours is so neat compared to mine. It's just like
this is
a shitstorm.
This is a sham for the studio visit with that gallery.
Yeah, I mean, it would take
like
me
this,
like 2 days to get it to look
this
like
big
this.
giant spirit sign right here is just hiding just like a 4 foot by 20 foot area of mayhem.
Yeah, mine is like, I think I have like lizards living in mine and stuff. Because I have a garage door, but it's, there's like a 2-inch gap under it. So there's just debris and like animals. And like, I think one time I had like a electrical socket with like plants growing out of it. Because they had like grown under the garage up into the wall. And
I'd be very interested in cutting a part of your garage out if I could. Because I'm into rescuing plants. That's what this one is right here. I rescued this... plant from some
like
asphalt.
It looks like
well,
clover
it
leaves,
was.
But then it's
It
like
is.
a vine.
It is clover, but originally it was. There was a big dandelion growing out of it. I'm super into dandelions in my work right now, just because they're this persecuted, highly edible, cool
survivors
thing. Yeah. And it really reminds me of growing up a poor kid, you know? Because I'm just like, I'm this really cool thing. Why are you always fucking with me? That's how I feel about dandelions. Clovers took over, which I felt like was such a great analogy.
Yeah.
Fucking clovers, man.
Shamrocks and shillelaghs.
Because fuck clovers. Anyways, so I guess we can get going talking about art and stuff now.
Yeah, so I'm Justin Michell from Philadelphia.
You actually pronounce your name Michelle?
Yeah, I've known you
I've
many
been
years?
fucking it up for years. Oh yeah, you're cool with all language too. We have the explicit thing, although we rarely use it. So get all your fucks in now.
Yeah, so I was born near Philadelphia, and I went to Tyler School of Art, which is part of Temple University, and I think I finished that in like '98, and then moved to Chicago, and then to Los Angeles, and then I went to UC San Diego for grad school, and then I moved back to LA, and here I am. So
who'd you work with out there in San Diego?
I worked with Kim McConnell, who was like a P&D pattern and decoration school, I guess, in the 80s, 90s.
Did you work with Eleanor Anton out there at all?
No, I worked with Steve Fagan. He's a filmmaker. Jennifer Pastor, Barbara Kruger, Chaim Steinbach. It was a good group of faculty there. There was a guy, because I'm like a theory nerd, so there was a guy, Marcel Henoff, who studied with like Deleuze in France, and he wrote a really good book on Sade. And so he was like, I had to have someone on my committee from outside the art program, and he was like the outside guy. I think he just passed away a couple years ago. But he was like really cool, brilliant guy.
Yeah.
But it's funny. I have this like, I read a lot of theory, but I don't. Like when I make art in the studio, I don't ever try to like base anything on that. I think I almost learned it as like self-defense because I was just like
that's so true in the art world. You can get hammered in critiques.
Yeah.
You really can.
But then I actually got hooked on it, so you know, it's kind of. I mean, it filters in weird ways. Like I think the paintings that I do that look like speech bubbles are almost like you know, structural linguistics diagrams in a weird way. Like they could be something out of like Ferdinand de Saussure or something, but I, you know, like I'm not consciously trying to
you have
make
the proper
work
pronunciations for all these things. I've been pronouncing your name wrong. I've been saying Saussure for my whole life. Like,
ow, it's so sore. Yeah.
That's obviously
I don't know.
not
I mean,
right.
I'm probably butchering them too. Like if you really say them like with proper French
I would
pronunciation,
trust you way more than myself. I literally pick these books up and I'm just like, fuck. I would love to be a theory.
I remember I had a friend in Philly whose favorite artist was, according to him, Jean-Michel Basquiat.
Oh,
so that was
that's tender.
Yeah.
Even for me, that's sweet.
Which was better. I didn't even know who that was. So when I, you know, started. So.
Wow. I'll be honest right now. I worry about people when their favorite artist is Basquiat.
Yeah.
I'm concerned.
I mean, this was 1995.
Yeah. No, and it was popular to really love Keith Haring back then too, and I get it. Don't get me wrong, like I get it. They were like breaking through, doing some different things and whatnot.
Yeah.
But like, I do have a problem with Basquiat in that he was just like, I will be famous first, and then I will be an artist, you know? And I was like, I so much respect artists who are just all like out there doing it, making work, you know? And then like this work is kind of like this beautiful thing that like may or may never be discovered. But for the people who do see it and get to enjoy it, it's like this it's like being in a place and time that's unique.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking before we started recording about how it's kind of, if you are one of the lucky people that can actually be famous for being an artist, you're a lot less likely to actually be recognized on the street, which is kind of like the best kind of fame.
Yeah.
Like you actually have
it's
some
like
amount
David
of like...
Beckham came to America. Right. He's like, I'm so tired of this bullshit. He came to America. No one cares about soccer.
I think it would be nightmarish to have people actually recognize me on the street and be like, oh, I have to like go take a selfie with this person. Like,
yeah.
I think that would be miserable.
It gets harder just to run errands.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
Sounds like it.
We can speculate.
Right.
I don't ever feel like I have to worry about that.
Yeah, so. I barely even get approached at my own art show.
Yeah.
Just my friends. My friends would just be like, oh man, great show. Thanks, buddy. End of encounter. Okay, so you went from Philly. Why didn't you go to New York? Like all the Philly kids go to New York, right?
That's true, yeah. I felt like I could have done that. I guess it seemed like it
would have been easier. You already had East Coast connections, blah blah blah.
Yeah. I kind of thought maybe someday I would, but I was less familiar with I moved to Chicago because I knew a few people that I went to school with who moved out there. Oh, so it wasn't like a complete blank slate.
There was a pit stop in the Midwest. Yeah,
that was 2 years. That was fun. Like I did like a pirate radio show there, and like I
love that.
That was fun. I mean,
I've always wanted to do that.
I mean, you kind of like
this is the contemporary version.
Yeah. and you don't have to
It's
worry
just
about
something-
like being
the
slapped with
FCC?
like
Yeah.
FCC fines and
Yeah.
stuff.
I
But
would I think I like that part though.
yeah, it was fun. Like, the guy who started it, he went by DL, which is funny because if you have an alias that's literally on the DL, like, but he. I think
I literally didn't know where you were going. I thought you were going to DL Hughley.
No.
And I was all like, wow, how's this connection going to be made? This is fun.
But he was a cab driver, and so the station started out from his cab, so it couldn't be traced.
Yeah.
Like, he would broadcast from while he was driving his cab around Chicago. Mm-hmm. And then at some point we got like an office space, and we're like hanging a antenna out the window, and then we would collapse it. But somehow they found who he was, and he got slapped with like $100,000 fine or something that he was trying to. I don't know how it ended up. I guess to answer your question, New York seemed stressful and prohibitively expensive. Like everyone I knew that moved there, I kind of like hung back. Like, I moved to Chicago and was like kept in touch with people, and they were all like working 70-hour weeks to live in like a place the size of a closet and not really have necessarily time to work. A couple of them stayed in New York, but probably most moved back to Philly and kept doing art. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, San Francisco seemed the same thing. It was like prohibitively expensive. Los Angeles, when I moved here, like 18, 19 years ago,
open and
it was
less expensive.
Yeah. I mean, when I moved here, I worked at a place in Pasadena called Book Alley. Uh-huh. I think they still have a Book Alley 2 or something. It's like a high-end, like, rare books. It was like an annex of the main store. But I was working there and, making like $7 an hour. And I could live on that, like in around 2000 when I moved here. Yeah. Well, it wasn't fun, but I could, Right. But, it was doable. And there was and still are tons of galleries here, It's like, I don't know.
And it's
I think it's actually a really good city to be an artist.
Yeah, this kind of like brings me to like one of your current projects right now. There's plenty of artist-run stuff, and you're involved in one right now. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Monte Vista Projects has been I think it's been around for about 15 years already, and it was in Highland Park on Monte Vista Avenue or something, and there was another space that hasn't. I think this space has only been around for maybe like 4 years at this point, called Tiger Strikes Asteroid, Los Angeles. And they are kind of unique in the world of artist-run spaces because they have branches in multiple cities. Like, they have a Philadelphia branch, a New York branch, I think a Chicago, and soon they might even have like a Berlin branch, possibly. But so it's a network of all these artist-run spaces, and there's a lot of transfer. Like, people will kind of curate shows in LA, even though they live in Philly or whatever. And so it's nice because they circulate all these people, and it's a small world, so people move to different cities and whatever. But so that space and Monte Vista, were both looking for new spaces. They had done this is all before I joined. They were in a show at the Brand Library in Glendale called The Collectivists or something. It was like a show of all artist-run spaces. And so they met up there and were talking, and the director of TSA LA, Carl Barada, who was from Philly, decided to make a push because they were getting evicted, or the rent was raised in their space downtown, which he called it the Haunted Mall, because it was like a sort of strip mall on 4th or 5th Street downtown, and there was like the elevator would be shut off, so you had to like walk up this like stairwell full of pee to get to the gallery, and it was kind of like weird and dingy. Yeah, so he was like, we need a better space than this. So he and Rebecca Bennett Duke, I think, were the ones who. She was the director at the time from Monte Vista Projects, and they decided to try to look for spaces together, and they found this building downtown called the Bendix Building. It's on like 12th and Maple, and you can actually see it when you're driving on the freeways around downtown. It's got like a red Bendix vertical letters that come down, but
yeah, no, I've driven by it.
So our space, Monte Vista and Tiger Strikes Asteroid, are kind of like Siamese twins now. Like there's actually like a little space. We share a storage space, and you can walk through one to the other. So, but that building has become like a really cool place where there's all these different artist-run spaces, and some that aren't artist-run. Like there's at this point we're on the 5th floor, so there's TSA, Monte Vista. There's what used to be called Post, and now it's called 515, I believe, because the guy who runs it.
Same folks for that.
Yeah, Habib, who runs it, has 2 other partners now, because Post is just when it's just only him.
Okay.
And I think he still does, shows and uses that name, but this space is 515 now. And then there's another space on that floor called AB Gallery. It's a pottery. Not pottery, like a ceramic studio. Mm-hmm. And Nicole, who runs that, has like a little gallery space in the front. And then on the 10th floor, there's Chateau, which is like a commercial gallery, and Track 16, which used to be in Bergamot Station for many, many years. Yeah. And then on the 8th floor, there's Durden and Ray, which is an artist-run space. So it's a whole, it's a whole bunch of galleries there. You can go to openings and just take the elevator up and down, and
so a lot going on over there, huh?
Yeah, it's fun. We get pretty good foot traffic for openings because people generally try to check out what else is in the building. And right now we're about to do March 2nd and 3rd, I believe is the date. There's this it's called OPAF. It's like a kind of outdoor experimental, I don't know what you'd call it. I guess it's kind of like high desert test sites, like art event. That's we're making this kind of collaboratively all making this wall that juts out on this concrete space. Yeah, it's OPAF, and it's in San Pedro at Angels Gate Cultural Center.
Oh yeah.
And then, so we generally don't show our own work at Monte Vista Projects. It's more of like a curatorial collective, I guess you could say. And so I'm curating a show in mid-April that'll be, it's a 4-artist show. It's Chris Oliveria and Jeremy Racine, who are LA artists, and Ann Seidman, who just moved here from Philadelphia, and a Philadelphia artist, Anthony Campazano, who will all be in that. So it's keeping me busy for now.
Yeah. That's the second time Anthony Campazano's name's come up recently, and just crossed my path.
Yeah, he was in a show. There's a gallery called Good Weather or something like that. It's like, it's a really strange space because it's basically like a stairwell outside of a studio building. And so I guess it's called, I forget, I think it might not be the right name, Good Weather or something, but
yeah, I haven't heard of it.
The idea is you're literally outside. So he was there, and he's actually in another show somewhere, I think probably like this or next month, but I can't remember where.
I'm really happy to hear you're still just finding the weirdest, most underground shit you can find. It's been your brand for me since I'd known you back in like 2000 something crazy, like right after you got here, I think. Yeah. This is when I met you originally, and yeah, you're still like I remember a long time ago we had like a running text back and forth, just naming
acronyms of like extremist groups.
Yeah, extremist groups, like
Symbionese Liberation Army.
Right. Just like all through history, like all the revolutionary left wing, right wing, just all of them. And like that's still an area of interest of yours, is just like when people go out there. I don't know how to describe what out there means.
Well,
but
it's
just
also like an extension of like do it yourself ethic. You know what I mean? I mean, like artist run spaces. I mean, they're, you know, it's very different than like the Symbionese Liberation Army, but,
right?
But you know, it's kind of,
you guys just don't have guns.
Yeah. Well,
but I imagine what would happen if we gave you guns. I don't know. You guys may melt them down. We don't know.
Yeah,
they would be a material of some kind.
No, but yeah, I mean, like,
but it would definitely be an alternate use for that gun. I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, DIY I think is a good. It's always good to be able to fall back on that, because, you know, there's so many commercial gallery spaces that have collapsed.
Oh yeah.
Since I mean, I remember just recently Acme moved from they were in that little space on Wilshire.
Yeah, like I never go there. So
and then
I went to Hauser and Worth one time.
Yeah, they moved into my neighborhood in Frogtown, Acme.
Yeah,
and I was kind of excited because it was like 2 blocks from me. I was like, oh, I can actually see this gallery without having to trek all over, and like fit it into all the other like, gallery hopping stuff.
Sure,
and then like 2 months later, they were shut down. And they were like what I would think was like established, successful gallery space.
Yeah,
and
absolutely. Yeah.
You know, I remember when Chinatown was really like hopping when I first moved here.
Oh yeah.
And there's still a couple spaces there that are worth seeing, but you know, it's like nothing near like when Perez projects and whatever used to be there. So I don't know. I mean, like, it's nice if you actually do stuff yourself and have an artist run space, then you're not subject to the violent whims of the art market.
Yeah.
And you know, we're not really worried that we're not going to be able to keep doing this because we don't make any money.
Yeah,
but
no, like even if the space was crushed by an asteroid or, you know,
struck
dinosaurs or something, you know, you would still be you'd still be going, you know, even if the earthquake comes and swallows it, you just probably open up a gallery space inside the pit left by the earthquake. And you guys would look around and go, you know what, this is kind of a cool space. Yeah. Like we can make a stair set out of this rubble over here and be inside. We'll just hang things, you know, it'll be fine.
I mean, that, I don't know about you, but that always seemed like a no-brainer to me.
Oh yeah.
You know, like I grew up listening to like Discord punk bands, and that was always like a like point of pride that you were able to do stuff from the ground up without asking anybody permission.
Absolutely, yeah. And if you keep it absolutely small, I was going through a bunch of stuff the other day. I ran across one of my friend's zines from like I don't know what it must have been, 89. Something like that. And that's absolutely that's oh god, it might have been earlier than that. It might have been like 85, but it was you know, I think some of that it is just entered into kind of like the permanent lexicon of the art world. I think that's a real positive thing. Yeah. Because as much as like the high art world has been super commodified, and now you know, big name artists are selling futures on their work. Like Jeff Koons and Paul McCarthy, who we talked about a tiny bit before, are now selling futures on the work that hasn't been made yet. Yeah. And art collectors are buying, selling, and trading those futures. And that's kind of like the opposite thing that's happening, but I actually don't think that kind of like hyper commodity could happen without this really fertile ground of DIY stuff, because we know that this is going to continue no matter how like insane that world gets. There's going to constantly be this.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who gets into art with the idea that they're going to become famous or rich is probably delusional. I mean, some people do, but like if that's the reason if you expect that to happen, you're probably delusional.
Yeah, no,
which is fine. Maybe that.
But like we've been around and through the art world long enough that we've seen those people just kind of like they burn out quick because they kind of just like they enter into either some part of the art world that is more on the money side of the art world. Like they end up, you start out as like a whatever, like a lot of us have done art world jobs, whatever, but then they kind of enter into the business side of it, or they enter into just like a totally different field. Like here in Los Angeles, you kind of just enter into the dominant industry, which is like film or tech or some, one of those things where you can like kind of like make a lot of money and be more comfortable and do all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. One of the things I like about doing an artist run space is not only are you kind of independent from the market forces, but also you can be independent from like academia and that whole thing, because that's a whole other kind of like
there you go, because
set
you
of
take
constraints,
away
like
permissions too.
Yeah, if you and a lot of I think it's all necessary in a way, like all these facets of like the art world, but if you are the kind of artist who makes work that's hard to sell because maybe it's like video installations or something like that, it tends to be, if you're more like in the kind of museum academia end of things more than, and I'm kind of lumping them together, I don't know if they're necessarily even the same thing, but versus like commercial gallery space, there's other constraints there too. Like you have to make work that can be written about in an interesting way. Like it's sort of like dominated in some ways by translating visual things into words or concepts.
Yeah.
And if you don't really do work that's easily like about something, like a topic that can be written about, and people are interested in, or it's like currently, I remember like when Paul Schimmel did that show, Helter Skelter.
Yeah.
I think in the 90s there was like all this, like there was like a topic of like abjection, for example, that was like, everyone was writing about abjection for a while. And if you didn't make art that like was easily like plugged into a certain discourse, then you were probably less likely to get attention or whatever.
Yeah, and it's the same now. It's like if you're not really, I mean, there's a dominant theme of identity happening right now.
Yeah.
And a lot of the big work is just based on marrying the artist's personal story with the work and selling the whole thing as a united story. And that's selling super good right now.
Yeah.
At the same time, I think if you come into the art world and you go, I'm going to do some work that is marrying my life with my work, and I'm going to make this narrative, like, I think you're probably not going to be successful. It's just like, doesn't really work to plan it that way, because then, there is still the path of being accepted by certain influential people that can catapult your work quickly into certain spaces and introduce you to certain collectors, and then
if you do things yourself, you kind of, it's this great freedom where you can do whatever the hell you want. Not have to like, I mean, I don't think, I'm not suggesting that artists who become successful in different ways always make art to do that, and they just might be lucky enough to be doing what's hot right now, in either on the market or in academic discourse or whatever. But it's just nice to not have to even worry about that and do whatever the hell you want.
Oh yeah,
show whatever you want in the space, and if I don't personally connect and believe in something, I don't have to show it or even engage with it at all.
Yeah.
This is nice freedom.
I kind of want to talk about a little bit about the progression of your work. You paint you tend to paint in a way that's like, it has the look of it is really tight, and you guys can go to, we'll spell it out because even I can't, apparently I've been saying Mitchell for a long time. It's Michelle, but you can go to justinmichell.com if you want to check this out. While we're talking about it, a lot of people do that. They listen to the podcast.
I'll spell it so people can actually find it. It's Justin Michell. So there's people always want to put it. There's no E on the end. There's no T in the middle.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
And there's also Instagram is Michelle_Justin.
So, explain a little bit about kind of your working method. Kind of how you started, how it got there, maybe, and then just kind of about just materials, simple stuff like that, and
Yeah, I think because I do painting and I do digital prints, like Photoshop, digital collage.
Yeah,
and I do actual collages too. I think collage has always been the way I think about making images. I don't really sketch on paper much. I make collages and then I do stuff on Photoshop and Illustrator. I think I always, there's that anthropologist Levi Strauss who had this famous distinction between engineering and on the one hand and bricolage on the other hand. And engineering is like you conceive of something that you want to make. Or you have a need to fulfill whatever, and before you start anything, you in your mind you sort of figure out the best materials you could use for that. You make forms, and it's like a heavily conceptual process. And on the other hand, you had bricolage, which is you have a random set of scraps. And you kind of assemble things ad hoc as need be.
Manipulating, and through that manipulation comes.
Yeah, and I think I've always worked that way. To me, the images I make are kind of like a journal, I guess, or a monument or little mini monuments to just being a person who has eyes and goes through the world and it takes in visual stuff and visual information, and I feel compelled to process it and out the other end comes these images that I make.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's sort of like a pressure, internal pressure that just has to find release somewhere. And so there's almost never a conceptual project that it's in terms of a message I'm trying to communicate through the work. Yeah. It's more just a sort of activity, like a mode of enjoyment or something of being visual. So, and I always, I'm always responding to images I collect and save, and whether it's file cabinets full of torn out magazine pages that I make collages or scan, or images grabbed from the internet or whatever. I cannibalize my own sketches a lot and reuse them and stuff. So
do you take pleasure in cataloging those things?
I take pleasure in stockpiling them, and I try to catalog them, but I'm pretty disorganized. So sometimes
is it just not interesting to you? I think there's
I'm
getting at is there's
I do
kind of
a
distinction, a motivational distinction there, where it's just all some people love to fetishize the process of cataloging, and that's Interesting. And it's part of the thought process that then makes the work.
Yeah, that's like more just out of necessity. Like I don't think I don't have like a whole set of organized like folders and subfolders. It's usually like loosely like, you know, there might be like a folder with magazine pages that all have like body parts or animal parts in them, and they're just kind of like shoved in a big.
And when you're in the process, are you just like, this really needs like an arm, and you go through the file with body parts and look for arms?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Okay.
It depends. Yeah. Like maybe I'll start to construct like a space made out of like buildings or furniture. Usually I don't even call them buildings. Like they'll just be called like facets or something.
Okay.
I mean, there is some kind of like structure to how they're all stored, but there's a lot of duplications and kind of
so does this work
disorder in it?
the collage based stuff, does it influence or if it does, how does it influence the work that I would say when I look at them I can't tell I can't tell if the like we were talking about the stuff, it kind of looks like a speech bubble with like transistors in it to me is what it looks like, or something. You know what I mean?
Those are still made like collages. Like I have Adobe Illustrator files with like hundreds of speech bubbles of different shapes, and
wow,
or like brick.
It actually looks more immediate than that, though. It actually, like when I'm looking at it, I'm just all like, "Oh, this guy just traced this out." You know what I mean? For this one piece.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, yeah, they're planned out before I make them.
Okay, and how does that work? How does that planning happen? Is it all in your mind?
No,
Is there a sketchbook? What's going on?
The sketchbook is Adobe Illustrator for that series.
Okay.
So I mean, I'll put there's those are have relatively few elements in them. Like that's the closest I get to engineering, if we're making the bricolage versus engineering.
Yeah.
That was. I think I first showed them in a 3-person show called Umwelt, and Umwelt is like the world that like an organism inhabits. Like for example, like a tick has, it's blind, it's deaf. It basically, its whole world is it can sense up and down, so it climbs up into a tree. So it has a sense of gravity, and it can smell a certain like enzyme, I think, from sweat glands. And so it just goes up in the tree, waits, and when it smells that enzyme below, it drops, and then it can feel around and feel like, hair follicles, or I don't know, I'm probably getting this wrong, but its whole world is composed of like 3 or 4 elements basically, and that's it.
Yeah.
So that I was thinking of painting or looking at images that people make as almost like an altered state where you have you can have a kind of limited set of elements that the whole world is made up of. Like if you look at old like Russian constructivist work or Mondrian, it's like made of a certain amount of elements. So for those, there was gravity in those, because it's like little kid drawing space where there's a line at the bottom and everything sits on that line. There's no perspective. Everything is super flat. And so there's colored blocks in that world. There's usually like a monochrome background color. And so the blocks cluster along the bottom edge of gravity, and then the speech bubbles come out of them, and they have more blocks in them, and all the blocks in the speech bubbles, and sometimes on the bases that they come out of, can be connected with it looks like wires. Like I'm actually putting acrylic paint into cake decorating bags for the larger ones, and there's like plastic syringes that you feed pet medicine on the smaller ones.
Yeah.
And so those are the only elements in that world. So all of them I do in that, it's like trying to see how much you can get out of such a reduced language.
Yeah.
And so those are kind of like how you would depict a conversation between two people if you couldn't use any figurative elements, like you can't actually do portraits or anything.
Yeah.
And there's no text. So what's left over from that is like a kind of almost like musical notation in a way of like how rapidly someone speaks compared to someone else, how verbose they are, like how loud and soft they get, and like in music they say tone color.
Yeah.
And it's not like really directly, like I never base any of these on actual conversations. It's more just like, if you could, how would you do this?
Yeah.
And so, I try to see what I can get out of that like reduced world of like limited elements. So sometimes the blocks sometimes they look like Atari or 8-bit video games.
Yeah.
Sometimes they look like TV test patterns. Sometimes they look like bricks. Sometimes they look like Legos. Sometimes they look like those military badge metal ribbons that they fold over, like how they have those huge blocks of like these colored bands.
Yeah.
Like there was one I did where the blocks along the bottom, there's a short one that's made of all military ribbons, and then there's a really tall one that fills like almost half the panel that's just bricks of one color. It's much taller. And so the word bubble on the brick tower, I guess, is coming on the top of the panel, and then the one from the metals is coming from below, and there are all these wiry lines that kind of pour out of the top one down to the bottom. And so it's almost like it's like a knight that comes up to a tower and like Rapunzel lets the hair down or something. I mean, it's not, I don't know if anyone else would see that, but it's kind of like a game I play with myself when I make them. Like how much, like there's one where the blocks in the speech bubble look like redacted text from FBI, CIA documents that someone got from the Freedom of Information Act. So, and one of the bricks in that looks like a castle. So it's almost like a field agent talking to the home office or something. Yeah. Like it's a challenge to me. Like, can you actually get a narrative out of like these minimal set of elements? Yeah. I always liked the paintings of Monique Prieto. Do you know her? She was, I think in the mid 90s, there was like an issue of Artforum where there was a show called Super Flat, I think, that came out around that time. And there was this kind of thing in LA of like super flat color. It was like almost post-painterly abstraction done in it, like re-looked at through lens of like narrative. Yeah. Because in the early 70s, late 60s, when that was first a thing, it was trying to evacuate reference, aggressively. It was like Michael Fried, I think, was the critic. It was like Clement Greenberg, like after that. So, you had like Helen Frankenthaler and whoever, Kenneth Noland and all them. And the idea was that it was kind of like Frank Stella. It was like, what you see is what you see. This is just paint on canvas. And the later artists, like Monique Prieto, wrote about remembering going to the museums with her father and looking at Helen Frankenthaler paintings, and they would try to make narratives out of them. The shapes were like characters. So, even like someone like Baudrillard, what's his name? Mondrian, like Broadway Boogie Woogie is like still, there's like a narrative there. You know what I mean? Yeah. So sure. I think it's interesting. Like I had a phase where I was trying to just make the materials be what they were, and I kind of realized like you can't ever totally like not have baggage, quote unquote. Oh. And so I kind of at a certain point started to like the baggage like when you have collage, there's always, even if you can't tell what it's from, there's like, sometimes I'll take bits of pictures that become totally unrecognizable, and I may even forget what they are in the final thing. But they might look scuffed or dirty or like just strange and evocative, like they came from somewhere for sure, but you don't know necessarily what they were. I don't know. I guess like dreams always have that too. Like all the, if you read like Freud's like psychopathology of everyday life or like his dream book, all the elements are kind of like connected in this networks of association that like trail off and all. Like it's almost less that they mean a particular thing than they become like these, like when you see signposts on a road that point like, X many miles to like Kiev or like Barcelona or where Sao Paulo, like that's what the elements are, more than like something that has like a symbolic meaning per se, with intention behind it, than they are as like nodes in networks that point in various ways. Yeah. So I guess that's how I've come to relate to like the baggage of source materials and whatnot.
I'll let this plane go over. Whenever I look at your work, I really don't know if this is what this is about at all, so I'm just going to go out on a limb here. There's a series of paintings that I just consider to be the meat paintings.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
there's some baggage in those. I can talk about that.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about the meat paintings? Because I know people are going to scroll through this and go.
They're probably some of the earliest ones on there, so you have to scroll back pretty far. But they're all the ones with the blue background. Those were. There was a death row inmate in Texas named, I think his name was Joseph Paul Jernigan. And I think it was like a home invasion where he like killed a couple or a family or something. And he felt a lot of remorse over it. And I'm not, saying this to be pro death penalty or anything, but in his mind, he wanted to do something good if he was going to be executed anyway. So he donated his body to science. Yeah. And so he became what was called the Visible Human Project, or there was a female and a male specimen, I guess. And the thing about them was in medicine, when you dissect a cadaver, it's been sitting for a while and it's settled. So it's not quite in the same state as like a living body. Yeah. But if you know exactly when someone's going to die because he was killed with lethal injection, then you can immediately cryogenically freeze that body, and it's no longer a cadaver, it's considered a corpse. Okay. Which is like fresh and like much more like a living body. Yeah. So they took this guy and they froze him, and then they milled, I'm not sure to what accuracy, it's at least a millimeter, maybe smaller sections, and they milled away like basically like a circular saw, like in horizontal sections. They went from his head to his toes and photographed and made an archive of his entire body. So, and I have the catalog of it. It's called, the project, the Visible Human Male or something. And so I scanned those in and made...
Scientists are way more appalling than artists have ever been.
Yeah, think of...
Like, what if you decided you were going to do that for your art? Like,
if you'd say...
Like, you'd create an international sensation. People would go nuts, but it's science, so I've never even heard of it.
Damien Hirst can get away with sharks and...
formaldehyde.
Sharks and, sheep and stuff. But, there is that... There's that weird project, the Body Worlds, that German guy,
who like flays bodies and leaves them open. I find this to be like,
it's kind of uncomfortably like, is that science or is that just art? And then
is it spectacle? It's spectacle in my opinion.
Yeah,
like it is the sideshow Like, he might as well pull that up on a gypsy wagon.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, he has, like, there's a wait list for that. Like, I think there was some question of whether he had gotten some bodies unethically from China it was like people that may or may not have consented to being used in that way. But now that it's a spectacle, there's there's a wait list. Like, you can't just become one of his bodies. Like, you have to wait your turn, and there's like hundreds of people who are like, I don't know how many he makes, but yeah, it's crazy. so anyway, there's this archive that exists, and I was scanned, and you can buy digital copies of it where you can reconstruct it, not just the way they cut it, like head to toe, longitudinal. I don't know.
Like
horizontal sections. You can,
if you're imagining the body standing.
It's detailed enough now that you can, they've archived it digitally, so you can turn it around in space and reconstruct it from inside to out, up to down, side to side, back to front. It can do like weird conic sections that go diagonally through it, or reconstruct specific organs and turn them around in 3D space. So, I mean, it's useful to medical pedagogy, because you don't have to actually use as many human cadavers.
Yeah, and it makes more sense. It's inexpensive at that point for medical students to be able to look at these things in detail and understand.
Yeah, but so this guy. See, it's funny because we end up talking about the series of paintings I do that are most easily talked about. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, these are the ones that I was saying earlier, like, I don't really think about theory that much when I work. But the word bubbles and
all
these...
this theory comes jumping out of your mouth. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny how that works.
Yeah.
But, because these are, like, I think I was at UC San Diego for these, so I had to, like, be in crits all the time and justify what I was doing.
So are you armored up right now?
Yeah,
because
I could.
We're on podcast. You're like,
well,
I have my theoretical armor on.
It's been a long time since I've been in school and felt like obligated to do this.
Yeah.
So when I wrote about...
I'm glad you don't feel obligated. I want you to be comfortable, Like, we got some bottled water. We got a foot heater. You know what I mean?
I mean, I made these paintings, and then I had to write, like, a statement about it. And so it went all kinds of places. So what I was thinking about with this is, you have the these are like figurative abstraction, I guess, right? Because what I did with this archive was I scanned them, and then I made like sort of outlines of a lot of the tissue from this medical archive. It was like muscle and fat and whatever, and organs. And so I traced hundreds and hundreds of these shapes from this guy's body, and then I had them in Illustrator files where I was just learning Illustrator. Like, I was a real Luddite painter for many, many years, and I never used computers ever. So this was when I was first learning, like, to use that as my sketchbook. Mm-hmm. And so I treated it like collage. Like, I could resize, flip, recolor chunks of these things. So I would, like, grab clusters of them and make these kind of alien bodies out of them that had no necessary correlation to human anatomy. So it was sort of like, when I wrote about, like, Foucault a lot with these, where you have the paradigms of power that he wrote about were bodies subjected to this sort of like normalizing disciplinary gaze, where to be looked at was to be sort of caught in these orthopedic instruments that like had a norm of health or whatever, this was a person who was like executed by the state, and couldn't have been a more clear example of this kind of like panopticon, whatever.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to take them and just subject them to my own kind of like metamorphizing urges where they could become things that bore very little resemblance to humans. You know, they were kind of like I love the this performance artist Lee Bowery. Do you know this? He was.
It doesn't come to me. Right
he
away.
was good friends with like Boy George, and a lot of Boy George's like weirder kind of public fashion choices are directly inspired by this guy. And he was sort of in the like club drag world, but instead of where like a lot of times people think of drag as like taking on temporarily like another gender's like signifiers. Yeah. Whereas Lee Bowery was like making costumes that were not even like human. I mean, it was like really radically strange, and like he would look like a cabbage with like shiny black legs with like, sometimes you'd have like a woman upside down strapped to him as part of a costume or something. You know what I mean? It was like really like outlandish like versions. There's the impulse of like the medical gaze where you're doing these things to visually to bodies in order to have a kind of like control over them or regulate them. And then on the other hand, you had Lee Bowery or something like that, where it was like just almost like perversely in a good way, like transforming the human body into like places where we're so far from that I was taking medical imagery and trying to do what Lee Bowery was doing at a like biological level almost. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like if I could make mutants or monsters like for their own sake, like, so in a way, like I guess I was like letting this guy's fate become something different that it was not intended to be by medical.
And so like how many of those are there, just as far as like paintings? Do you even know how many are?
Yeah, there's not many of those. There's like 8 of those that I specifically use that archive from. Yeah. But and then
they're
that show was called Shambles because
technically they look laborious. Are they laborious to make?
Not really. Like I don't really. A lot of times I look at paintings and I think that this person spent way too much time and effort for the effect that they got out of it. You know what I mean? Like I'm not there's definitely no Puritan work ethic in what I do. If there's an easy way to do it, then I'll do it the easy way. Yeah. Like I think that
there's now there's a cultural cachet involved in how much labor you put into it. Like there's like, especially if it's factory output type studio, like I was just watching there's kind of like a mega documentary that came out about the high art world, and they did this interview part with Jeff Koons, and he was like, they were walking through his studio, and there was like just a line of studio assistants working on easels, and they were recreating these like Titian paintings and stuff like this, and they were doing them. The process they were doing them with was intentionally the most laborious way that you could do, and bringing so much technology into it so that they were kind of trying to like negate the artist hand in the recreation of a Titian, which is like, maybe a very artistic, like I'm got to air quote artistic in that because they're like considered to be very technically well-produced art paintings of their time, right? So they're doing these like tiny laser cut templates of, and then they have like all of the colors that will be used in this painting mapped out and numbered, and so you will use paint color number 12 to do these 7 dots, and then they would apply these dots.
Yeah, it's really strange because it's like this fetishization of like the human hand, but it's not the artist's hand. It's an assistant.
No, like you can't have the artist's hand in it anymore because there's like this shame associated with having an assistant now, like because we've known that like populism doesn't appreciate it, you know,
even though that's the way, even in the Renaissance, that they were already doing it that way.
Yes, because we now have to, like, instead of just, like, bringing new ideas to the public and educating them about old ideas, now we have to pander to a public that is, like, owning the public space without any kind of thought or education into this at all. And I'm not trying to come in the defense of Jeff Koons, because I would just never do that. But, like, at the same time, like, there's this weird crossover moment happening where we have to, like, acknowledge populism, and it just seems like the wrong reaction to that to me. Like, the correct reaction to me would be to just, like, make what you made, which is, like, no, I'm not going to, like, belabor this issue just to be impressive to you, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I take seriously, like, the fact that photography exists and painting is something different than that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, I don't know, well, I mean, that can, like, take all kinds of forms. So
you're no longer beholden to creating photorealistic works now. To me, if you make a photorealistic work post invention of the camera, you're being very impressive as to your drafting skills, and, like, more power to you. But you, to me and my way of thinking, are now similar to a draftsman that works in an architecture firm. Like, you very accurately showed scale in your drawing of what this home will become.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I understand, like, because photorealism was actually only possible with the invention of the camera, right? It wasn't like it's a reactionary thing totally, where it was like, well, even though the camera's invented, we're still going to do this. It was, you know, like, to be able to have images that were blurry, like a camera would make them, or blown up to, like, the size that they were. I mean, I guess I appreciate, like, the fact of something to be like, we can do this now, let's see what it looks like. But I'm not especially interested in that, or especially, like, the kind of work ethic of, like, oh my God, this took someone this long to make. I'm almost like, and that's all I get out of it. You know what I mean? Like, I want, like,
it is a bit of a one-liner.
Yeah, if you can make a digital print of something and it's almost like, why bother, like, remaking that as a photo? Those ones that I was making with the kind of meat ones we're talking about, that was the first. I had a grant from UC San Diego where I spent it on getting vinyl masking material made. So, you know, I was making these hard edge paintings that were similar to those before. They weren't all from the same archive, but they were still kind of bodily, meaty, kind of shambling creature looking things. And I was, you know, covering the panel with masking tape and laboriously cutting with an X-Acto knife all the shapes out. And I got a grant to use vector files and a vinyl cutter to make the masking material. So instead of, like, having to use masking tape, I just got it cut on a machine.
Right.
And then you know, used a paint roller and that one-shot paint.
Yeah.
So they're, like, really shiny and glossy, like outdoor sign enamel. And so, you know, it was a relatively quick process for what I was doing before, but I could have much, much more detail and like, little shapes that almost would have been prohibitively, like, do I really want to do this? If I have to do it all by hand, it's going to take, like, I can only make one of these a year. Whereas in this way, I could make, like, you know, 8 of them or whatever. And so that's great. I mean, to me, it's all just, like, different tools. Like, people can find what's interesting about materials or tools and kind of, like, fetishize it in a way and make work about that. But to me, it's always just like, a way to make an image.
Yeah.
Like I don't especially like talking about the process because it doesn't. I already know what my process is, and it help me think through. I'd rather talk about like
does it
how
help your
people react
audience?
to the imagery if I even have to talk about it.
Do you
at
find
all.
it helps or hinders your audience because the mode of construction always comes in, at least to me in my work. I don't know if this happens to you or not, but when you do have that opening and you might talk to various people that have different kinds of levels of art education or exposure, does that topic come up? Do they?
I really have no idea like what my audience thinks of my art. I mean, like I know like in
Would you want to know?
yeah, sure. I don't know if it would change like
Kind of like you're not pursuing it though, right?
yeah, I mean it's like when I was in school, if people didn't know what to say or if they didn't know how to articulate their own reactions to what the imagery itself was, then it was always a fallback to be like, how did you make this? Like, what's your process? Like, what, you know, you talk about like vinyl or these kinds of paints. And to some degree, like if you are a painter and you want to recreate something you see, like, oh, that's a nice flat glossy paint. What kind of paint did you use? Like there's like people who talk shop, and that's most of, I mean, I think most of my audience is my peers at this point. Like I'm not selling a lot of work, and you know, I'm not being written about by writers. So the people I talk to are usually other artists. And so there's always a certain amount of like talking shop where I talk about process, but I don't know. I think I try to make images that take me to a place where I no longer know what to say about them. Like those are the most interesting kinds of image for me. Like to me, it's like a painting is like a sort of pleasurable trap that your eye falls into and has a hard time getting out of, and it's like enjoyable. Yeah. And I don't make them to talk about, I don't make them to communicate any specific ideas. And I think that I think that lends itself to not hearing feedback about them in a way. I mean, you know, I have studio visits and talk to other artists, but I'm not sure at the end of the day what people get out of them, you know, other than they enjoy the experience of looking at them. To me, that's the important thing. Because it's nice to have a space where you don't have to like verbally justify what it is that you're doing or experiencing. I think, I mean, just, you know, the fact that we're sitting here having a podcast about art, it's like in a certain way, if you do enjoy something, you want to kind of geek out and talk about it with other people. And of course, but like
it's my entire motivation.
Yeah. But, when I'm actually sitting with art, this is not the eventual goal. Yeah. You know, I had a friend who is a curator at a pretty well-known institution in Philadelphia, and she like wouldn't go into my studio at a certain day because I don't know if she felt pressure like that I was asking for a studio visit in a professional way, which I wasn't, but she was like, I don't look at painting because I don't know how to write about it. And I was like, I'm not, you know, it's like I wasn't asking her to write about it. I just wanted to show a friend what I've been doing because we're friends, and I was excited about new stuff.
And then this political thing happens.
Yeah, but and you know, I'm sure she's exhausted and whatever, and like doesn't want to do work stuff. But it was interesting to me that like someone put it so blatantly, like was so frank about it. Like if I can't write about this, I'm not interested in it. Yeah, and it was like, wow, it's definitely not the internal motivation I have to make paintings.
To you, that's just like a weird thing that just happened where you were like, that's not inside my framework of thought.
I mean, I would think almost if you were a writer and you had trouble writing about something, it'd be a challenge. But I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah. I think we're talking about the pressure of output now, almost.
Huh.
You ever get that? You ever feel the pressure to output work?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like my grandmother paints still. She's like 90, and she's always done landscape paintings. And she says that if she's out of her studio for a while, she can actually feel it in her hands. Like hands want to do something that. Yeah. So I definitely get that. If it's been too long since I've been in the studio, I feel like something is missing.
Well, that's that pressure you were talking about again, like that pressure valve almost. Oh, there's a spider living in that artwork. Sorry. That brings us back to the studio conditions we were talking about before we started.
Yeah, your studio's a lot more neater than mine is, at least.
Well, this is fictitious.
Today, yeah.
This is a theater set right here. Why? Like that's another interesting thing in the studio visit for you. Like, do you go in bald or naked, or do you try to create theater like me? Like, I'm trying to impress people.
I mean, I try to clean it up and make it presentable, but I usually don't prepare like a statement that I'm gonna say, or I hate writing artist statements.
Oh God, it's my nightmare.
Like, and I can do it. I mean, I always end up.
I would imagine you would be the best of everyone I know.
I can. It's easier. It's definitely easier for me to write about other people's work.
Okay.
And it's funny because there was like an article, like a viral article that all my artist friends were sharing, that was like what not to do in an artist statement, and one of them was like, "Do not quote Deleuze," or like French post-structuralist theory. Yeah, Foucault. And I kind of can't help doing that sometimes, but I try to minimize that. But it's always retrospective. Like if I always make the work first, and then if I have to make a statement, I'm like, what was I doing there? Yeah. It's never like, to write a grant for money for a project that you want to do in the future, like almost kills the fun of it to me. Like if I know what I'm doing too much, it's like not interesting anymore, Yeah,
so like
why make it if you can?
But it's about getting the money. So like, how about if you just like write something that is just like, they'll like, then get the money and then do whatever you want. And you can be
open-ended with your projects, like I'm still making these speech bubble things, even though I've already talked about them. But for me, whenever I go in the studio, it's like, okay, there's this kind of like default rules that I've created about what this is, like about this process, and how can I like kind of mutate them into new and unexpected ways. You know what I mean? If they've become about something, then how do you not make them about that anymore? Or you know what I mean? Yeah. How do you like change what it is that you're doing? And if you notice there's a rule, like what happens when you bend or break it, or add like a new thing that is this a violation of the set of rules that have happened here, or is it just like something that I've never has never come up yet? Yeah, you know what I mean. Like sort of like the piles of bricks on the bottom or blocks at the bottoms of those paintings. Yeah. At a certain point, I noticed that the wiry parts were only between the bricks and the word bubbles. So what would happen if the bricks at the bottom were joined by these wires, so they started like looking like they were sprouting legs and starting to walk and stuff, and it that kind of changed the expectations of like what was possible in them. So it's always like I'm always mutating into places that have less meaning.
So what is the what governs what will actually make it into the piece? Like if you decide that you did something and you're like, oh, I didn't like that. Is like, do you have an emotion? I did not like that, or do you have a thought that doesn't fit within the theoretical context of this piece?
Yeah, it's more like emotion. Like this, I mean, different pieces for each one. It's different. You know what I mean? Like for the ones I do that are kind of like, for lack of a better word, like space architecture kind of things. Like there's much less criteria for what makes it in them than there is in the speech bubble ones. Like the speech bubble ones are kind of purposely trying to limit the elements, because sometimes like you don't know. I was feeling like sometimes I'd run out of source material and then that would grind to a halt in the studio.
Yeah.
So those ones were for times when I didn't have source material, but I still had this like game that I was playing.
Yeah.
Like here's a game, where the elements you use are just blocks, speech bubbles, and wires. That's it. So you don't ever have to search for source material. You always just have those elements that you can like play this set of games with.
Yeah.
And like if you're a musician, you always have, you can pull out your acoustic guitar and just play that.
Yeah.
Or whatever it is, your MIDI keyboard or something. Instead of like having to dig through crates to make sample-based music or something.
Right.
So I don't know. I try to have things to do. If something else isn't working, then you can go to this other thing.
Oh yeah. Is it like this is like a time management thing almost, right? It's just like
yeah.
Or is it like I'm keeping the flow going?
Yeah, and just keeping interested in it too. Like I don't ever, if I'm not having fun making and looking at what I do, then there's really no point to it. Like
it's unsustainable.
It's not how I
point,
make
right?
money and survive. It's what's the point of it otherwise? It's just purely like
what will keep you engaged and interested and all that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if we've hit on all of it yet, but like, what's coming up with you next, and what's the because you're working on the artist run thing and you're curating a little bit, and
I think we're recording already when I mentioned the OPAF that thing coming up, and then in mid-April I'm curating that 4-person show at Monte Vista. I'm gonna be showing work in this coming year in Berlin. Monte Vista did an exchange last year at the Torrance Art Museum where we showed a bunch of Berlin artists. So in exchange, we're going to go and show in Berlin. So I'll be sending, I think for that, it's going to be the some of the speech bubble, smaller works on paper for that. And we're doing another exchange similar with artists from Rotterdam. So we're going to host them, and then we're going to show over there. And same with space in New Orleans. I think the Rotterdam space is called Collab, and it's like more of an experimental kind of music performance space.
How do you guys get those associations going?
We just...
Is it word of mouth?
I don't know how that one...
know people and that kind of thing? Or?
Yeah, I mean, we reach out to people too. I think we kind of bit off a little too much this year, and we're going to try to scale back and do more local LA exchanges. But yeah, I mean, it's a small world of artist-run spaces, and people seem to be excited about doing things like this, because a lot of them, like us, we're not like a vanity space where we just show our own work.
Yeah.
But when we are hosted by another space, that's kind of when we show our own work.
Okay.
So it's kind of like, we'll show your work at our space, and maybe you'll show our work in your space. It's kind of like, exchange that way, which is good.
It's cross-pollination type stuff. Yeah. Do you find that ever comes out in your work? Do you ever get influenced by people that you might work with?
Not consciously, because you're always trying not to do that in a way, but
I don't know why.
I mean, maybe
why
not.
Would you try
maybe
not
people,
to?
yeah.
So you don't collaborate. You
no,
never
no,
collaborate on work.
No, that's not true. I did for OPAF is pure collaboration. Like, it's all the members of Monte Vista are welding and building this thing out of plywood, and there's one side of it that will be probably three of us collaborating on that side. It'll be me and this artist who usually does photographs and collages. His name is Rakeem Cunningham, and Deborah Burrows, I think that's how you say her last name. She does like little ceramic sculpture collages, kind of, where she takes things and like recasts them with like different pieces on them. And so the three of us are gonna do like the wall of that, and Rakeem and I will be like painting pieces of like Luan with house paint, and I'm probably going to use like vinyl stencils to do patterns and stuff. So that'll be interesting to see like if we can freely kind of steal from each other and do like a mashup. That's interesting.
Yeah.
And collage is like good for that. I mean, like I've I did a show at Cypress College a few years ago. There's a space called Summer Camp Project. I don't know if they still do it. I think they do. It's like this couple's house that they show art in the backyard. Like they have this long sloping backyard, and people can do all kinds of things there. So they were kind of given this space at Cypress College, and so they invited like 10 artists and we made like kind of weird bleachers, like steps to nowhere, and little rooms underneath, and had the students there collaborate. And so I've done stuff like that, but I don't really seek that out to do like collaborative installation work. I think I know a lot of people who are in bands who the problem is always like, how do you work with others, and how do you have egos? Like I kind of like the simplicity of just going in my studio and being the only one I'm answerable to. Yeah.
So would your like ultimate, like for you, would it be just like monastic? Just a monk in a tower, just like
when I work, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's nice to, I love having openings and having people come in person to see what I do, because like if you're a musician and you perform and people like give you instant feedback, like that's something that like I don't think painters ever really get. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
you get to have an opening and talk to people, but
that,
like
though, when you have like there will be like experimental bands who will have like a painter come out and they'll like live paint.
Yeah. There's that.
It's always horrific to me.
I mean, it's like,
I don't know why. I'm not trying to put a value judgment like you should or shouldn't do that, or I'm not you, but
I would not. I wouldn't want to do that.
I'm like.
Because I'm not like a gestural painter either. I mean, the old films of Jackson Pollock painting that are sped up, like those are fun because he's that kind of painter.
Yeah.
But like, I don't think anyone's gonna want to see me like adhering like vinyl stickers and like painting matte medium around the edges so the painting doesn't bleed underneath, and then waiting, like having lunch while that dries, and then coming back, and then, painting like, a layer,
sitting in your favorite chair,
and then like leaving it dry overnight so I can paint over it. Like it's not really a process that's interesting to look at.
Like you would need a festival type situation to do a postage stamp size painting, right?
Yeah,
I would love that. That would be my favorite. You could have we could set up like on a stage where these bands would just be coming on and off continually, and you'd be just like sitting there, and there's like maybe if we really wanted to speed it up, we'd give you a hairdryer. You know, like you could dry this paint.
I love the I think of it. I don't know if he was thinking of this, but I always think of those, those dance step pattern paintings that Andy Warhol did.
Yeah.
Like to me, that was like a really funny like response to like the whole mythology of Jackson Pollock being like in his paintings and like doing this kind of like shamanistic dance over the canvas. Like Warhol kind of just was like, took it like appropriated a dance step pattern and just had the assistant silk screen it and put that up, and that's and you can still picture like the canvas turned sideways, and or is like oxidization paintings where people peed on them and it turned to copper-based paint, verdigris or whatever. But I don't. I guess that is like theater again.
I mean, the moment you frame a painting or a drawing or an etching or whatever, that's a theatrical element. You know, really, the moment you take it out of the studio and put it into a gallery, that's theater.
Yeah, that's true. And now the whole, like, you know, you can't go to an opening without someone doing like selfies in front of the artwork, which is good because it's free advertising.
Okay. You know, I mean, like,
as long as
that's one way of thinking
just
about it.
Just put my name in the hashtag.
No, that's probably not gonna happen. It's gonna be just like, I was in Frogtown. Check me out.
Yeah, hashtag just DTLA or something.
Right.
But yeah.
I mean, like, so then what's preventing you from making the best backdrop painting in the world? Like, it's gonna make everyone look great. They're gonna do it. Like, how come you're not doing paintings on the street, graffiti style paintings of wings on the street that people can put themselves into?
Yeah, you could do that.
Yeah.
We used to do backdrop painting.
Yeah,
Who knew that they were that was the new? They
were the future. We were the future before the future.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm a little sad that you couldn't get the podcast going before, but we're gonna send you and this is like instructive for people listening too. Because if you don't have a smartphone, you can still listen to the podcast if you go directly to our Libsyn page, and you can just play it on a laptop or a computer or whatever at Art Traffic on Libsyn. We'll send you a link for that. But you would have known. Now I'm gonna surprise attack you now with these two segments that we do at the end of the podcast, which are like one of them is kind of like your challenge to us. Who would you like us to try to get on the podcast that you think would be like somebody interesting? And the other one is side hustles. God dang. Side hustles is like you know, what's the shitty job that you had in the past to keep it going? Or it could be like, what are you doing now? It doesn't have to be shitty. It could be funny, it could be not funny, it could be just like, how do you keep the lights on?
Gotcha. Well, right now I work. This is a job that I never would have thought existed ever. So my job now is I work at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, and I take care of their art collection there. So I'm like an art preparer. There's a curator there.
Shit. Yeah.
And that's my direct supervisor, and I'm one of the two art preparators for this hospital. And this is I should tell this story. This is pretty good. So the reason that there's an art program, I guess, there, or art collection there, is because I think it was in the 70s, there were this couple that collected art. They were Frederick and Marcia Weissman. Yeah. And there's a really famous David Hockney portrait of them in their sculpture garden where there's a totem
they're
pole.
Like famously collectors.
Yeah. And so they were still married at this point, and they were out having trying to have a romantic anniversary dinner at like a hotel restaurant. And there was a table in the corner that was like being really rowdy and obnoxious, and so Frederick got up and to have some words with them, and he went over and he was like, "Hey, could you guys keep it down? And I'm trying to have a dinner with my wife here." And one of the group turned around, and it was Frank Sinatra, and he was like, "Fuck you, you know who I am, go sit down." And they got into it, but finally they agreed to like tone it down a little, and so Frederick sat down. As soon as he sat down, the other table erupted 10 times as loud and obnoxious. Right. So he came over again, they got into it. And apparently one of Frank's entourage, like some goon, picked up... There's two versions of the story. Either it's like a telephone where you could like call the waitstaff over to your table, or like a big glass ashtray. Whatever it was, this guy clocked Frederick Weissman in the head. He was in a coma for 4 days.
Oh my God.
Woke up, didn't know... At Cedars-Sinai.
Yeah.
Didn't know who he was, didn't recognize his wife. She brought in his favorite little small Jackson Pollock painting and hung it opposite his bed. That was the first thing from his life that he remembered, and it kind of got his memory back.
Wow.
And so they were so impressed with like the role of art in his healing process that they flew Warhol out, had him sign posters, like donated all these like Liechtenstein, Rauschenberg, Warhol, like mostly prints, like lithographs and stuff to Cedars. And that's how, and gave an endowment where the interest from this bank account would pay the staff, so it wouldn't cost the hospital money to maintain it. So that was how the Cedars art program started.
Amazing.
And so years and years later, when both Weissman and
so is your
Sinatra
facility
passed
like
away,
off-site, or are you showing up at a hospital every day?
Yeah, I show up at a hospital every day, and there's like an on-site framing shop. So, because it saves us money to actually frame on site.
Okay.
And there's like a little skeleton staff of like 3 or 4 of us, and we take care of the whole collection, frame it, move it around, make sure. But so one of our most recent donations.
And does it lend out? Do you lend out?
And we don't buy. It's all donated. We don't buy anything.
Okay.
And one of our most recent donations was from Tina Sinatra, and it included Frank Sinatra lithographs in it. Now, he does 2 kinds of work. He does like sad clowns, or did, I should say, because he's no longer around.
Right.
And like kind of abstraction that looks kind of like the kind of jazz album cover abstraction, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
like it'll be like,
I do. I've not seen those paintings, but I have seen the sad clowns.
So we got some of the abstract stuff. So Frank Sinatra is now in the Frederick and Marcia Weissman collection as an artist after years and years after like inadvertently having a kind of indirect hand. And and so I don't know if that's water under the bridge, or if it's like a high five in the afterlife, or who got the last laugh on that. I'm not really sure, but it's definitely strange.
That is a wild story. That is a wild frigging only in the art world story. You could really dissect that. You could get a lot of meaning out of that.
I wonder if that's supposed to be public knowledge, but who knows? I was just told it.
Yeah. Wow, you heard it here first, people. Really.
Another thing
you're going to be fired in a couple of days.
When Cedars of Lebanon Hospital merged with Mount Sinai and became Cedars-Sinai, Cedars of Lebanon, the old building, was sold to the Church of Scientology. So it's now that blue Scientology headquarters is the former Cedars of Lebanon building. So
did not know
it's weird. Like, you wonder what's going on in those former hospital rooms there. If someone's being like held against their will because they gave them all their money.
No doubt they're auditing folks right there, right now.
But they paid for the building in cash. So it was like a Friday afternoon, and the guy from Cedars of Lebanon who was like trying to close the deal, was like, finally, I'm done. I don't have to deal with these weirdos anymore.
Yeah.
They're gonna sign off. I'm gonna seal the deal. And so they had lackey after lackey pay, like, I think it was 8 million or 11 million, something like that, in cash.
Yeah.
So like lackey after lackey brought in like briefcases full of cash and paid for it that way. And so this guy, it's like a Friday afternoon, he's like, am I going to have to like take this in my car? And is there a bank that's going to stay open, or am I going to have to sit on this all weekend and keep it? So he found a bank that was willing to like stay open late and count it for him. But I can imagine like being in that position where you've just been paid in
$8
cash
million
by the
in
Scientology at like 3:00 on a Friday.
Like I want to imagine that there was like it was a lot of cash. The bills were very non-sequential. They were all heavily used, and then there was some personal jewelry thrown in to like make up the difference. Like, this is all the worldly cash of all of the Scientologists from this one building.
They have, I guess, their world membership is shrinking, and there's only a certain amount of things. If you're like a religious organization, you can't just spend money on whatever. Like, they take in a lot of money because they have really, really wealthy members, but they have less and less members. It's kind of shrinking. So they have, one of the only things they can spend all this money on is real estate. So they have all these buildings over the world that are like empty and not being used just because there's nothing else they can spend all that. They have too much money to spend.
Yeah, they can make that cash flow though. Yeah,
I'm sure they do, but
it's
weird. Like there's on I think it's like Vermont and no wait, where is it? It's off of like where Silver Lake Boulevard turns into Beverly.
Yeah.
Around there's like the Hubbard College of Business or whatever. It's like, and if someone was doing an expose and they went into the records, and I think there's only like 1 or 2 people that graduate a year from this business college, and the parking lot is like huge, but there's like 2 cars in, so it's just like this empty shell of a building. It's kind of like North Korea or something, where it's just these like shell buildings that are like for show.
Yeah, you hear a lot of stories about Scientology like that.
Yeah.
That's side hustles.
So that's side hustle. Yeah.
Do you got an artist that you like really respect their stuff that you'd like to?
This is a local artist?
Yeah. It's got to be L.A. County, but we will go into like the 3 counties, I guess, but only for someone special. Yes.
I would endorse for this podcast. Her name is Sarah Jo Frieden. I'll spell it out. It's one word. Sarajo, Sarah Jo Frieden, Frieden, and it's sarajofrieden.net if you want to look her up. So she's incredibly prolific, like just works her ass off, just makes tons and tons of work, and it's all really. She's a really good colorist and uses like pattern.
Mm-hmm.
So I just did a studio visit with her and 2 other people a month or 2 ago, and just like how the amount of work and the consistently good quality of it in her studio was like one of the most inspiring things I've seen lately that makes me want to get in the studio and paint. So
wow,
her work is awesome. Cool. And my
Sarah Jo, right on. That sounds great. Cool. I especially like it. Like almost always when we do that segment of the show, people almost always recommend people to me I've never heard of before, and that's my favorite part. I love that. I love that I get to like research.
There's so many artists in LA. It's
so many
crazy.
There's so many great ones.
Yeah.
And that's just like kind of how and why this podcast began, because we were like working in the studio, which we do a lot, and we were trying to look for a podcast that was just all like, God, we really like, we feel like we know the tip of the iceberg of artists, and we feel like maybe all of us do, and maybe we could create kind of like this like interlocking web where we could get, I had a really naive idea that we would get like everybody. Let's get everybody. You know what I mean? When you first start, so that you could just like, someone could kind of like go on and just like a catalog of all the names and just be like, oh, I'm going to listen to that guy talk about his work, or that person, whatever, whoever.
Well, it's probably not that many degrees of separation, really.
Yeah. At this point, I feel like we could get somebody from like more or less every group.
Mm-hmm.
That would be kind of.
I was doing these. They're not really memes, but these images that I would share that would be like degrees of separation, like the Kevin Bacon. Yeah. Everyone is 6 degrees from Kevin Bacon.
Yeah.
So I tried to take people who were like politically like oppositional or something, and like see how many degrees of separation I could come between them, or just interesting, like funny combinations. Like I did, there's that, that Canadian, professor of psychology, Jordan Peterson, who always, he's like, you can't get away from him online. He's just like always rails against quote unquote cultural Marxism, which is actually like a play on like that Nazi term, culture Bolshevism. Like it's literally translated as that.
Jesus Christ, I didn't realize that until this now.
He's like a kind of just a...
But I avoid him really hard.
Well, if you can, good luck. But anyway, so I made a 6 degrees of separation, I think it was 6, between him and Che Guevara. And I did it. So it went like this. It was Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan, Mark Mahan, the comedian, and I actually had photographs of them standing next to each other. So I made a visual.
Oh, wow!
So it was like Jordan Peterson on Joe Rogan's podcast, a picture of them together, and I didn't do any Photoshop And then it was Joe Rogan and Mark Mahan. I think that's how you say his name, Mahan.
Okay.
He's a comedian.
We've well established that I mispronounce everyone's name.
So then there was Mark Mahan with Sacha Baron Cohen.
Okay.
Like standing from whatever, a comedy event. And then I had Sacha Baron Cohen interviewing Noam Chomsky.
Ooh.
And then Noam Chomsky debating Michel Foucault.
Okay.
And then Michel Foucault standing at a protest next to Jean-Paul Sartre. And then Sartre interviewing Che Guevara. So I got like 6 degrees. And the best part was that it went through Ali G of all people.
Right.
Like how do you get from Jordan Peterson to Che Guevara? The answer is Ali G. I think I did one. It was like there was one that was like Jacques Lacan to Slick Rick or something, and it went through Pee Wee Herman and Grace Jones or something.
Oh,
I did a bunch of these.
That's like a who's who of some of my favorite people.
Yeah.
I don't care if Pee Wee Herman got caught masturbating.
I don't either. I don't think there was any kids around. It was like an adult.
Yeah,
theater, right?
I mean, come on. He was at like one of those old school like porn.
Yeah, what do you
theaters? Like what's the expectation here?
Yeah, if you can't see someone masturbating, you probably shouldn't be in a porn theater.
Yeah, right. Come on.
I don't know.
It's happening.
Free. He's already free, but free Pee Wee.
Oh wow. Okay. Well, do you got anything else that I didn't cover that needs to be covered? Do you got more folks that you want to try to talk about? What's up?
Follow Pekingese Liberation Army on Facebook.
What? What is Pekingese Liberation Army?
It's like
is that the memes?
Yeah, I don't know who makes it.
Is that the generation of all of the memes that are good?
Yeah, it's good.
All right. Okay, everybody, that was Justin Michell in the Art Traffic Studio. Thanks so much for coming out, Justin. And really, check out his artist run gallery. I think that is so cool. Hit us up at Art Traffic LA. Let us know if you'd like to hear from somebody. I loved everything that Justin had to say about kind of like the way he works. And his side hustles was fun. All that stuff about Scientologists and bags of money. And Frank Sinatra. Like, come on. You guys hilarious. All right. So thanks again, Justin, for coming out. And we'd love to hear from you guys, artists you love and you would love to hear that are like Justin Michell, or somebody who's not like them that you would really like to hear from on the podcast. Drop us a DM on Instagram at ArtTrafficLA or at ArtTrafficPodcast@gmail.com. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening. And we'll catch you next week.